Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're interested in how to sew this high-low sweetheart neckline dress, please stay tuned. So the first step is to prepare the dress form. Here I am using draping tape to mark the shape of the neckline that I want for the top of my dress for the sweetheart neckline. So once I have achieved the shape that I want for my neckline with the tape, the next step is to take the measurements of the form in order to figure out the size I need to cut the blocks of fabric to do the draping. So I measured the length and the width of the 4 different panels that I'm going to be needing. And I added about 4 inches to each measurement, so the width measurement and the length measurement, to give me extra room for the draping. Now, I sped up this footage because this isn't really a tutorial on how to drape a princess themed garment, but if you guys would like me to do a full tutorial on how to do this, then I will. Just let me know. But you can kind of see my process here. I have the blocks of muslin and I pin the shape that I want and then use a marker to trace out the outline of it to mark the waist and to mark where I have the draping tape for the top of the bodice. So here I am laying out my fabric that I'll be using for this dress. I folded the selvage edges together, which are facing the wall, and the fold of the fabric is facing me. So next I lay out my fabric pieces with the center front pattern piece is on the fold of the fabric, and then I lay out the remaining pattern pieces. And I made some pattern adjustments based on the fitting that I had with my friend who I'm actually making the dress for off camera. So that's what you see me doing here with the ruler and the marker. I'm just marking up my pattern adjustments and adjusting my seam allowances. And once all of those changes are made, then I cut out the fabric. The lining of the fabric in the interfacing is cut out the same way we just did with the face fabric for the garment. Now, one quick tip about using the interfacing: make sure you use an interfacing that is made for stretch fabric, which I did not, and I know better than what I did, but I used an interfacing that's made for woven fabric. And once I completed the whole dress, I put it on my dress form and it would not zip. It was too small, and I knew it would be too small for my girlfriend, so I ended up having to rip out the entire lining and remake it. So do not make that same mistake that I did, and make sure that you pick the appropriate interfacing for the type of fabric you are using for your garment. After I had all the pieces cut out, the interfacing, the lining, and the face fabric, I fused the interface into the lining pieces. And after I had all the pieces fused, I just went back and trimmed all of the excess interfacing from the lining pieces. So the next step is to start putting your pattern pieces together. I like to pin my pattern pieces together. So here I am pinning the center front to the side front pieces together. Make sure that your right sides are facing each other. Once the front pattern pieces are pinned together, I move on to pinning the back pieces. I pin the center back to the side back, right sides facing. Once I have everything pinned together, I head over to the sewing machine to sew the garments together. So at the begin and end of each seam, I make sure that I do a back stitch because I do not want my garment falling apart while it's on the wearer. So that's important. I always make sure that at the start and stop of each seam that I do a back stitch. Here I'm attaching the front of the garment to the back of the garment. So I'm attaching the side back to the side front. And for my sides, I always like to have a 1-inch seam allowance just in case I have to do some type of last minute fitting adjustments. I have that extra seam allowance in there. So here I'm sewing with a 1-inch seam allowance. The seams that I sewed before, the princess seam in the front and the back, they are sewn with a 1/2-inch seam allowance. That's my personal preference. You can do whatever seam allowance that you choose, but I like to do 1 inch on the side and 1/2 inch for the princess seams. Now that the bodice is complete, it's time to move on to the lining. Now the first step that I always do on the lining is to do a stay stitch. So the stay stitch serves two purposes. One is to make sure that the garment is not stretching out of shape. And the second purpose, since I'm adding boning to this garment, since it's going to be a strapless dress, it serves as a guide for where I should start and stop the boning placement. So I do this to all of the pattern pieces. So the center front, center back, side front, and side back, at the top of the garment and at the bottom. Once the stay stitching is complete, the next step is to sew all of the lining pieces together. Now I did this off camera because this is the same exact process to sew the lining pieces together is what we just did to sew the bodice pieces together. So once I have the lining pieces sewn together, I take it to the sewing machine to give everything a good press. One important step is to make sure that you clip the front princess seams in order to get the seam to lay flat. So you want to clip to but not through the actual seam of the front princess seam. And once you do that, just give everything a good press. I'm using my tailor's ham to press the princess seams because I like to keep that nice curve going on. And then the rest of the seams, I just press them flat. The face fabric is pressed in the same manner as the lining piece was just previously done. For the boning, I like to use masking tape and a pair of scissors that are not used for cutting fabric. I also use 2 sizes of Rigilene boning, a 1/2 inch and a 1/4 inch for the front princess seams only. Here is the stay stitching that was done previously, which will be used as a guide to where to start and stop the boning. Again, the stay stitching was done at the top of the bodice as well as the bottom. For this particular dress, I'm going for a light structure. So I'm only going to be boning the seams of the lining. I will do another video showing additional boning placement that I like to use for a more structured garment in the future. To begin, I place a piece of masking tape at the end of the bone. You want to do something to seal the ends of the boning because you do not want the boning to poke through the garment and either poke a hole in the lining or just bother the person that's wearing the dress. I've done that in the past and it's not fun to have boning sticking into you. I have also tried in the past to heat seal the boning, but I like this method of using the masking tape better because it goes a lot faster. I don't measure and pre-cut the boning before sewing it down to the seam. That's just my personal preference. I find it goes a lot faster if I just cut it as I go. To start, I place the boning about 1/8 of an inch or so, like right under that stay stitching at the top of the bodice. And I just sew down one side of the boning. Once I get close to the bottom of the bodice, I cut the boning close to the stay stitching line. Tape the ends. Turn the garment around and sew back up the other side of the boning. And that's it. That's how I bone the garment. And I follow this process for all of the bones. This process goes pretty quickly for me now that I have this process in place. I can bone a garment really quick once I follow these same steps. So as I said before, for the front princess seams, I prefer to use a 1/4 inch boning due to the curve. It's easier to just curve the smaller, thinner piece of boning than it is for the thicker piece to go over the bust curve. But the installation process is the same as was just previously demonstrated for the 1/2 inch boning. Once all of the boning is installed, this is what the lining of your garment should look like. And now we're done. So in part 2 of this video, I will show how to sew the skirt and then we'll complete the final dress. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to my channel. See you next time.